Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello, and welcome to Reflections, the show from Torch Trust that focuses on disability and faith in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and I'll be with you for the next half hour as we continue our Summer Bible Study two-part special. Now, don't worry if you didn't catch part 1 last week, as everything will still make sense. If you'd like to catch up with part 1 after this episode is over, you can listen to the Reflections podcast on your favourite podcast platform, including Spotify, Apple Music and SoundCloud. If you're blind or partially sighted, you can also sign up to receive the monthly Reflections Omnibus by calling 01858 438 260. And now on with the show. Last week we heard Sheila and Mike thinking about two different aspects of encountering Jesus, meeting Jesus and following Jesus. Sheila shared a reflection about the woman at the well, and Mike explored what it means to follow Jesus through the story of Bartimaeus. These reflections have been taken from our Summer Bible Study Zoom group, which took place live throughout July. This week we've got two more special guests here to talk about encountering Christ. First, here is Torch's CEO, Tim Jeffrey, who's reflecting on the way we're invited to be changed by Jesus.
So here's Zacchaeus, and we learn that he had not only, was probably very unpopular, but actually also he had extorted more money. He wasn't just doing the Romans' bidding. Actually, he was doing more than that. He'd extorted more money than was due and lining his own pockets. So imagine, Zacchaeus, as well as this whole town, hearing that Jesus is coming along. So by this time, Jesus' ministry is really sort of getting fired up. Lots of people would have been hearing about him, about some of the things he was saying, about the healings, the miracles, the feeding of the 5,000 or whatever it might have been. But, there must have been a great excitement. This guy who we're not sure who he is, but does amazing things, is coming to Jericho. He's on his way. And you can imagine the news spreading round the town of Jericho and people coming out and, he's coming, he's about to enter the town, and coming out wanting to see him, wanting to hear him, hoping that he might do some amazing miracle that they'd be able to see, maybe hoping that they themselves would be healed. And along with everybody else, we hear that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was. But then we also learn that he's a short man. He's somebody of small stature. And so in a crowd of people, not only is he going to be kind of jostled and really unpopular, but actually he's short and can't see over people's heads. So he can't get to the front. He knows the route that Jesus is going through the town. And so he runs ahead and climbs a tree. So here's this guy who's a kind of, in some ways, an important person in the town, climbing a tree, probably with the children, because he wanted to see who Jesus was. He wanted to get behind the stories, the gossip, the hype, all the opinions that would have been flying around about Jesus, and actually find out for himself, who is this guy? What's he all about? And one of the challenges for me, I wonder if it's a challenge for you, how eager am I to encounter Jesus? How eager am I to, who is this person? Who might this be? Do I want to see Jesus? Am I eager as Zacchaeus was? Would I have been prepared to climb the proverbial tree? What's the equivalent of me climbing the tree? So in amongst this great crowd of people, the noise, people calling out to Jesus, probably calling out for him to heal them, in the middle of all of this, Jesus sees Zacchaeus up a tree. The person who's always overlooked, who's always made fun of, who's reviled, Jesus sees him. And he sees past his appearance and his role, and obviously recognizes something in him. Obviously has some intuition, some insight from God, and so invites himself round for lunch. Now put yourself in Zacchaeus' position. Imagine that happening. You want to see Jesus, you've climbed the tree, and Jesus stops with all these people around and notices you, sees you, the person who other people don't want to see, don't want to be with. Jesus stops and talks to you. You know, that must have been an incredible thing for Zacchaeus to be picked out in that way. And Jesus says to him, I'm coming to your house for lunch. You know, it's not something I invite myself round to people's houses very often. But Jesus did that. He said, do you know, here's this guy who's climbed a tree. He's obviously, there's a desire to encounter Jesus, and I'm going to take him up on that. There's a lovely Zulu saying, in common with some other African languages, where when you meet somebody, particularly first thing in the morning, you say "Sawubona," and "Sawubona" means I see you. I see you. That here you are. You exist for me. You're an important person to me. I recognize you and your existence. And it's a lovely greeting, isn't it? It's not just hi or hello, or how you doing. It's I see you. You're important to me. And in some ways, this story has that sense of it, that Jesus sees Zacchaeus. And friends, we can be sure that Jesus sees us. That Jesus, the maker of the heavens and the earth, sees each one of us. So this encounter that Zacchaeus then has with Jesus, going back for lunch, Zacchaeus changes. It seems almost immediately, almost just being recognized and seen, and Jesus wanting to be with him. He changes. He changes from being the miserly extortioner who was trying to get money out of people all the time, to being somebody who's giving away half of his wealth, who's repaying people back where he's robbed them. So rather than hoarding money, he begins to to give it away, to make amends for his previous misdemeanors. And this isn't just a little adjustment. This isn't going from a tithe of 5% to 10%. This is a major realignment in him, and not only in his wealth, but also in his values and attitudes. So whilst there's all those healings and miracles and profound change in people, actually, there are so many more people that encountered Jesus as Zacchaeus did. And just in his seeing them and his loving them and his listening to them, they changed. They were radically different as a result. And it's impossible, isn't it, to know all the stories that Jesus had, the impact he had on so many people. But the reality for us is actually, when we really encounter Jesus, we will too be changed. We can't encounter Jesus and be genuinely open to him and be seen and know we're seen by him and loved by him and not be changed. And in fact, in some ways, the very purpose of an encounter with Jesus is that we are changed by it. That's it. It shapes us. It molds us.
Next, we're joined by Reverend Chich Hewitt, a retired minister and long-time friend of Torch Trust, who has Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. Chich has been reflecting on inviting others to encounter Jesus.
The 11 disciples went off to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had instructed him to go. There they saw him and worshipped him, though some hesitated. Jesus came towards them and addressed them. All authority in heaven and on earth, he said, has been given to me. So you must go and make all nations into disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Teach them to observe everything I have commanded you. And look, I am with you every single day to the very end of the age. So that reading, last few verses of Matthew's Gospel, known as the Great Commission. Our call, the Great Commission, go forth and tell. Going to jump around a little bit, start with those first few words where Jesus was with the 11 disciples, some worshipped him. The translations we're used to will say others, or some doubted. The Tom Wright translation I rather like, which he says is an alternative word, which could use some hesitated. Probably what it means is they didn't doubt because they'd all seen him. He was right in front of them. But probably if some worshipped and some hesitated, it probably refers to the fact that as Jews, brought up as Jews, they would only have felt it right to worship God alone. And they hadn't probably quite made that link as to who Jesus was within that whole relationship. So that could well be why some doubted or hesitated. And the hesitation possibly came within the fact that they were worshipping rather than it was Jesus really standing in front of them. I want to move into the middle section now, where the Jesus commission comes, and then look at two bits which lie on either side of that. Because he says, go and make disciples of all nations, or go and make disciples in all nations. And he defines what that means with two things, by baptizing them and by teaching them. So discipleship has happened. It happened very quickly in the New Testament period, within a short space of time, thanks to Paul and his letters and the early followers. The word spread very, very quickly. And then it was fairly intermittent as it went. We know, for instance, that it reached England in two different ways, through Augustine from the south and through Irish and Scottish Christians from the north. And once they'd agreed on certain issues, it went forth into North Germany. It seemed to go forward in pulses rather than steadily. You'd suddenly get a huge impulse, and this faith would spread to one area, then to another area, and of course to Africa and to Asia and all over the world. And God may have been quite disappointed with the mistakes we've made and the silly things we do, but I'm sure God must be pleased with all those wonderful people in the past and many in the present who continue to bring the faith to others, so that that discipleship happens. And to be a disciple is to be a learner. So that brings us to the other two aspects that we're looking at, that of baptism and that of being taught. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. I think we all know that the word Trinity never appears in the Bible. As a later church development and understanding of what was in the Bible. But this is the one place where the three are mentioned in that very specific way. There's a verse I can think of in the Ephesians where Father, Son, and Holy Spirit come close together. And of course, you can think of Jesus' own baptism. When he went down into the waters, the Holy Spirit came down like a dove, and the Father spoke. So the three persons of the Trinity are mentioned there. But this is the one place where you have baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, which is so much a part of our Christian world and the Christian things that we do. And baptism, of course, is our journey into the Christian faith, our entry point. And I think people in or out of the Christian tradition realize and understand that baptism is something very important. Once baptized and your admission of Jesus as Lord, you've made your confession and you're very much a member of the Christian family. It's interesting too, if you look at the end of Acts 18 into 19, how important that the baptism formula is. We learn of Apollos, who had been schooled in understanding more about Jesus, but he had only been baptized into the baptism of John, and he hadn't been told the full aspects of the faith, but he was obviously a very skilled person in generating that faith. So he was pulled aside by Prisca and Aquila and taught a little bit more, and probably baptized too, that by implication. So he became a very prominent teacher once he was fully skilled in everything that what there was for them to pass on and for him to know at that stage. And then, of course, you come into Acts 19, where Paul says to the Ephesian believers, have you received the Holy Spirit? And they said, no, we've never even heard there is a Holy Spirit. Well, what baptism did you have? We had John's baptism. So they received baptism in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And when hands were laid on them, they prayed in tongues, and the four aspects of the Holy Spirit were made prominent in their lives. So it's not just a formula or words you say. What our baptism involves and what makes it distinctively a Christian one is that baptism happens in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And as Romans 6 would have it, you go down into the waters to die with Christ as you rise to have life with Christ.
Well, we're almost out of time for this week. Don't forget, if you'd like to hear the first part of our Encountering Jesus Bible study, you can listen on a variety of podcast platforms and on our own website, torchtrust.org. Just click on Living with Sight Loss and then Radio and Podcasts. For any questions about the show, Torch Trust, and the services we offer, including how to join in with live future Bible study sessions over Zoom, then do give us a call on 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260. Our lines are open Monday to Thursday, or you can leave us a voicemail. Or you can email info@torchtrust.org. So from me, Marilyn, and everyone on the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.